Hi folks, this is for discussion number 4, and this is a lecture that we're doing. I'm going to have other lectures in other areas, even though we aren't having discussion on them, but I thought it would be more important to hit all the discussions first. So we're working this week on the subject of classification. So what I'm going to do is use this article that I found through United States Department of Justice, and what it is, it's an interesting article. It's by Thigpen and Hutchinson in the Jails Division for the National Institute of Corrections. And the idea behind it is the importance of objective jail classification. So when we mean objective jail classifications, we want it to be based upon correct type of systems or ideas of what should be used to make these classifications. For example, in the 300 years leading up to the days that we live in today, there was a really bad period of racism, especially at the county jail level. And so a jail classification system that involved race would obviously not be a valid system of justification for classification. Then, of course, this was very common in the United States, especially in the South, and I'm sure even in places like Indiana, where I'm from. And so no one could even qualify to be, for example, involved in special rehabilitative programs that we talked about last week. And so, the only ones that could be qualified for this would be people that were white, obviously, and might have some other attributes like wealthy family or something like that. The actual jail classification systems paper was prepared by a guy named James Austin in February 1998. I think it still has a lot of validity because it brings up, a figuring out, what are, objective systems. And a lot of this can also be used at the state level or even at the federal level. The objectivity idea kind of flows across different areas. So the important things that they're looking at is, if you look at Chapter 3, you look at the types of, they use instruments, which is assessments or tests that help to classify the inmates, and they also need to have, they're talking about the importance of training, and then the other thing they talk about is automation, which is kind of a form of, it is a given that everybody goes through this classification. Now there are a number of these kind of classification programs. I know the state of Indiana has one, the state of Ohio has one, and this has been going on for a number of years. But it's beginning to narrow down a little bit more because of determining what is an evidence-based or objective kind of system. So important point here is that there are more jails than any other kind of penal institution in the United States. There's probably at least one jail for every county, most likely. Now there are probably some of these smaller counties that I've learned about that share jails between 2 or 3 counties. And that's a more of a modern idea. One of the things they say in terms of the history of this is that prior to 1870, it was just about all about retribution and those type of systems. If you remember, we talked about retribution last time, and that's retribution is a form of attempt to get even, or what we call eye for an eye type approach. However, they said in the 19th and then on into the 20th century, the idea of corrections started to change direction, and they started to incorporate things like rehabilitation and reform into the systems that are being used as far as how to classify people. You know, you used to have a lot of people that would work on farms, and they would work on the road. They'd have these chain gangs and things like that. And that was a form of a retribution because they figure, hey, you know, we have to pay to keep you locked up. We have to pay to feed you, and we're going to get some money back out of you by making you work. One of the things that they're looking at in terms of classification is that they said one of the better systems that they came up with started around 1973, and then they built on that, trying to improve it so that it was more meaningful in terms of meeting the needs of the criminal, not so much the needs of the institution, you know, to make them generate money. For a long time, just about everybody did some kind of work, like maybe wash clothes, did some work in a garden. Some counties had their own dairy farm, for example, and they would make the inmates work on the farm, you know, milk the cows, muck out the stalls, you know, whatever it took, you know, to keep that farming operation going. Now, one of the things to keep in mind about jail classification is that you have people in jail who are awaiting sentencing. They haven't even been found guilty yet in some cases. They're just there. They can't make bond. So it's really hard to classify people like that. They may only be there for a short period of time. There also is the possibility that they could be found innocent. You know, wow, you know. But anyway, one of the things that you get into is that it's very difficult for jails because they have an obligation to keep everybody safe, but at the same time, you know, with these overcrowded jails and everything, they have a problem with a lack of personnel in order to cover all the different defendants that they have to watch. So some parts of the jail classification involve intake and booking. This is where you know, they take people's pictures, fingerprints, you know, those type of things, and then they will make some type of an interview, find out about their background, their date of birth, addresses, and so forth. The initial custody assessment is a form of classification. It's just depending. The question is if they're going to be held for arraignment, if they're going to be put out on their own recognizance, are they going to post bond, you know, what is going to be done there. And of course, that part involves a number of people, not just the sheriff or the people in jail. Could involve the judge, for example. The other thing to look at is if someone is reclassified because of maybe they first thought, oh, well, yeah, this one's going to make bond, and then that fell through. So some of that might have to change. Also, if they come up with additional charges, they may think, well, this is a nonviolent offender, but then later on they find that, well, no, there was an injury that was involved here, but we didn't notice it, or we didn't find out about it at first. So it's a little difficult to classify people in jail because, you know, it's kind of a bit of volatility there. We don't know if the person's going to be there, are they going to leave, you know, are they going home, are they going on to prison. Whereas if we're doing classification for prisons, it's easier because we know, well, this guy's going to be with us for the next 5, 10, 20 years, you know. Objectivity is really trying to be as scientific as we can be in these cases, and it's difficult sometimes to really reach a form of effective objective classification because sometimes we're a little bit blinded. We may think, well, yeah, we're being objective, we're being fair, when we really aren't. We're just not really seeing it objectively. I mean, we're coloring our thinking based on what we may think is like fair enough for people who are defendants, but it may not be as effective as it should be. Now, one of the things that they've come more to in modern times, starting in the 70s, like they said, and it continues to change all the time, is the use of an instrument, which is what we would call a test or an assessment. And so what we do is we go down through and we try to look at these different instruments, and we want to consider their validity, basically a custody or assignment level that reflects an inmate's true risk for disruption and violence in the jail. Reliability is a system basically the same for two people that are similar along a number of fronts. Equity, is it fair? I mean, can we really say that this is a just system? In other words, this goes right to the heart of what I've started this all about the discrimination and some things like that. And then utility. So the important point there is system can be used again and again and be efficient. So let's hit those really quickly one more time. Validity, reliability, equity, and utility. Those are the elements of an objective jail classification system. If we can do jail classification, then basically what I'm saying is that it's a lot easier to do prison classification. So important points here too, in order to apply this using this screening instrument, would be we need to screen the inmate right after booking. We need to consider the inmate's initial custody level. We need to reassess the inmate periodically depending on their change in status within the court system. For example, if they've been found guilty, we may want to put them in a different place. They may qualify for some kind of rehabilitative, job-oriented, what we call trustee type program, or other. Or they may just need to stay right where they are, but we never know. The importance is to periodically reassess everybody. It's also important to look at inmates' needs, and we need to initially look at that. I mentioned in the earlier lecture about people that can't read and write. It might be good for them to go into some kind of a GED class, for example. There's a lot of these things. They're not expensive. You can even bring people in from the community schools, different local facilities that are available, the library. There's a lot of pastors that are willing to come and spend time with people. And so when we're doing these assessments and so forth, try to plug these inmates into different kind of services that they could benefit from. But we don't know that unless we do an objective assessment. Another thing is the concept of overrides, and that is that there may be some people that have very serious violent history, maybe that the police or sheriff are familiar with. We want to be very careful about this, because here once again there may be the potential here that someone could at least allege that someone's not getting a fair shake. One of the things we want to be really, really careful about is something that goes on in the schools too, and that is like Johnny Fox is hell on wheels, let's say, and he's very violent, very angry. And so when Ricky Fox comes along, we want to treat Ricky just like Johnny. Well, Ricky hadn't done anything yet, so we have to be a little more careful. Now, Ricky's done something to get into trouble, but what we're saying is he hadn't done anything dangerous, violent, these type things. Every person needs to be weighed and judged and assessed on their own merits, not because of their brother, good or bad, not because of any of their background, other than things that are important to the process. In other words, issues about violence, things like that, more important than some other things. Issues about reading and writing, these can be important in terms of putting people in to rehabilitative programs. So really what we really should do is look at the discussion 2 materials that we talked about, along with this discussion 4 content, while we try to figure out what to do for each individual inmate. And like I said, we are using the example of the county jail, but I mean, a lot of this same information is useful at the prison level. So I hope that you got a little something out of this. I think there's some good reading here. It kind of helps you get a sense of what's going on. I think if you would look at page 16, it's the last page I want to put you in touch with, page 16 on this report that I attached. It's called Exhibit 2. It has goals, OJC principles, instruments, and these type things. So you can look at a lot of potential useful information while you're fashioning your discussion board post. You can always get a hold of me if you have any questions. My email address is p.dawalt, D-A-W-A-L-T, @snhu.edu. Thanks for listening and looking, and I'm excited to hear from you in terms of what your outcomes are.